What if I told you there's a small block V8 that made big block owners sweat bullets at every stoplight? An engine so underrated that Chrysler deliberately lied about its power output to keep insurance companies off buyers' backs. This is the story of the Mopar 340, the David that consistently slayed Goliaths on America's streets from 1968 to 1973. Picture this. It's a warm Saturday night in 1970 Detroit. A guy in a Plymouth Duster 340 pulls up next to a Pontiac GTO with a 400 cubic inch big block. The GTO driver smirks. He's got 125 more cubic inches. The light turns green. Tires smoke. Engines scream. And 13 seconds later, the little Duster crosses the quarter-mile finish line first, leaving the GTO driver wondering what the hell just happened. This scene played out thousands of times across America, and it always ended the same way, with big block owners learning a painful lesson about underestimating the 340. The Mopar 340 V8 wasn't just another small block. It was Chrysler's secret weapon in the muscle car wars, an engine that proved cubic inches didn't automatically equal performance. What mattered was airflow, compression, and engineering excellence. And the 340 had all three in spades. To understand why the 340 was so special, we need to travel back to 1967. The muscle car market was exploding. Every manufacturer was locked in a horsepower war, and the conventional wisdom was simple: there's no replacement for displacement. Want more power? Build a bigger engine. Ford had their 428 Cobra Jet. Chevy had their 427. Pontiac had their 455. And Chrysler, they had their legendary 440 and 426 Hemi big blocks dominating the high end. But here's the thing about big blocks. They were heavy, they were expensive, and most importantly, they attracted insurance companies like blood attracts sharks. A 20-year-old kid could forget about affording insurance on a Hemi Cuda. The premiums would cost more than the car payment. Chrysler needed something for the youth market, an engine that could run with the big boys but fly under the insurance radar. Enter the 340. When Chrysler engineers started developing this engine in 1967, they had a specific mission: create a small block that could embarrass big blocks, maintain streetability, achieve decent fuel economy, and do it all while being officially rated at under 300 horsepower to keep insurance costs manageable. No pressure, right? The foundation was Chrysler's LA small block architecture, but that's where the similarities to lesser engines ended. The 340 featured a 4.04-inch bore and a 3.31-inch stroke, giving it its 340 cubic inch displacement. But displacement was just the beginning. The real magic was in the details. Let's talk about those legendary X heads. Officially designated as 2.2160 heads, these weren't just any small block heads. The intake valves measured 2.02 inches, the same size used on Chrysler's 440 big block. The exhaust valves were 1.60 inches. For comparison, Chevy's vaunted 350 small block used 1.94-inch intake valves. That extra valve area meant the 340 could move serious air. But Chrysler didn't stop at big valves. The ports were carefully shaped for maximum flow. The intake ports flowed 235 CFM at 0.500-inch lift on a flow bench. The exhaust ports moved 165 CFM. Those numbers might not mean much to non-engineers, but here's the translation. The 340 heads could flow enough air to support well over 400 horsepower on a 340 cubic inch engine. That's like giving a middleweight boxer the punching power of a heavyweight. The compression ratio was the aggressive 10.5.1. In 1968, that was serious compression for a street engine. High compression meant more power from every drop of fuel, but it also meant you needed premium gas. Chrysler deemed this an acceptable trade-off. Performance enthusiasts would happily pay a few cents more per gallon for the extra power. Now here's where Chrysler got clever. The advertised horsepower rating was 275 at 5,000 RPM. Torque was listed at 340 lb-ft at 3,200 RPM. These numbers were complete fiction. Chrysler was playing the insurance game, and they were playing it brilliantly. Independent dyno testing consistently showed the 340 making between 320 and 330 horsepower at the crank. Some well-tuned examples pushed 340 horsepower, exactly 1 horsepower per cubic inch, which was the holy grail of naturally aspirated performance. But raw horsepower was only part of the equation. The 340's real party trick was its ability to revia. The forged steel crankshaft could handle sustained high RPM operation. The connecting rods were also forged steel, not the cast pieces found in lesser engines. The pistons were cast aluminum with a slight dish to achieve that 10.51 compression. This rotating assembly was strong enough to regularly see 6,500 RPM without complaint. Some brave souls spun them to 7,000 RPM with upgraded valve springs. The camshaft was surprisingly aggressive for a factory engine. With 268 degrees of advertised duration on both intake and exhaust, and 0.429 inches of lift on the intake, and 0.444 inches on the exhaust, this cam meant business. It gave the 340 that distinctive lumpy idle that announced to everyone within earshot that this wasn't your average grocery getter. Chrysler also included features typically reserved for racing engines. The 340 came with a windage tray, basically a shield that kept oil from splashing onto the spinning crankshaft at high RPM. This reduced parasitic power losses and helped the engine maintain oil pressure during hard acceleration. It seems like a small detail, but it's the kind of engineering thoroughness that separated the 340 from pretenders. The intake manifold was another piece of performance art. The standard 4-barrel intake was a dual-plane design that provided excellent mid-range torque while still flowing enough air for high RPM power. Topped with either a Carter AVS or thermoquad carburetor, depending on the year, the 340 could gulp all the air those X-heads could flow. So what was actually going on inside this engine that made it such a giant killer? It all came down to efficiency. The 340 used its displacement better than almost any engine of its era. The combination of excellent head flow, high compression, aggressive cam timing, and low reciprocating weight meant the 340 could accelerate faster than engines with far more displacement. Think about it this way. A Pontiac 400 had to accelerate 60 more cubic inches of displacement with every revolution. That's more reciprocating mass, more rotating weight, more internal friction. The 340 was like a featherweight boxer with knockout power. It could dance circles around the heavyweights. The 340 first appeared in 1968 in a handful of Dodge Dart GTS and Plymouth Barracuda models. But it was 1970 when the 340 truly came into its own. That year, Chrysler unleashed the Plymouth Duster 340 and Dodge Dart Swinger 340. These A-body cars were relatively light, around 3,200 pounds, and with the 340 under the hood, they were absolute weapons. A properly tuned Duster 340 could run the quarter mile in 13.9 seconds at 102 mph, bone stock. No headers, no slicks, no tuning. Just drive it off the showroom floor and go hunting for big blocks. For context, a 1970 Chevelle SS 396 with 56 more cubic inches typically ran 14.0 to 14.2 seconds. The Pontiac GTO with the 400 engine, usually mid-14s. The 340 was consistently quicker than engines with significantly more displacement. But here's where it gets really interesting. The 340 wasn't just quick in a straight line. The lighter weight compared to big block cars meant 340-powered A-bodies could actually corner. They could stop. They were genuine performance cars, not just straight-line missiles. A Duster 340 could embarrass a Chevelle SS 396 on a twisty road just as easily as at the drag strip. The street racing scene of the early 1970s was dominated by these giant killers. Every weekend in every city across America, 340 Mopars were teaching big block owners expensive lessons. The smart money was always on the 340. Sure, a well-driven 454 Chevelle could take a 340 car, but it required a significant displacement advantage to overcome the 340's efficiency. And then there was the fuel economy factor. A 340 Duster could achieve 18 miles per gallon on the highway when driven conservatively. Try getting that from a 440 or 454. This meant you could drive your 340 car every day without going bankrupt at the gas pump. It was performance you could actually live with. The 340 also became a favorite of racers who understood the NHRA's class structure. In stock and superstock classes, cars were classified by weight and advertised horsepower. Since Chrysler had sandbagged the 340's rating, these cars got favorable classifications. A Duster 340 could compete in classes where it had a massive real-world power advantage. It was legal cheating, and racers loved it. Between 1968 and 1973, Chrysler built approximately 240,340 engines. They powered everything from Dusters and Darts to CUDA 340s and Challenger TAs. Each one was a middle finger to the displacement-obsessed establishment. Each one proved that smart engineering could overcome brute force. The 340's influence extended beyond just straight-line performance. In 1970, Chrysler created the AAR CUDA and Challenger TA for Trans Am racing homologation. These cars used a special version of the 340 called the six-pack, with 3 two-barrel carburetors and revised heads. Rated at 290 horsepower, another laughable underrating, these engines actually made close to 350 horsepower. They dominated Trans Am racing until the rules were changed to handicap them. Professional racers quickly discovered the 340's potential. With basic modifications, headers, bigger cam, some headwork, a 340 could easily make 400 horsepower and still be streetable. Go deeper with compression, radical cams, and serious head porting, and 500 horsepower was achievable, from 340 cubic inches. In the early 1970s, that was borderline witchcraft. The 340's reputation grew so strong that it actually hurt sales of Chrysler's big block cars. Why spend extra for a 383 or 400 powered B body when a lighter, cheaper A body with a 340 would outrun it? Dealerships reported customers specifically requesting 340 cars after witnessing or hearing about their street performance. But the 340's success couldn't last forever. The 1973 oil crisis and tightening emissions regulations spelled doom for high-performance engines. For 1973, Chrysler dropped the compression ratio to 8.5.1 to meet emission standards and run on regular gas. Power dropped to 240 advertised horsepower, though the engine was still underrated. The 1973 340 was still quick, but it had lost some of its edge. After 1973, the 340 was discontinued, replaced by the 360 with its longer stroke and lower performance focus. The era of the giant killer was over, but the legend lived on. Today, 340 engines are among the most sought-after small blocks in the collector car world. A date-coded 340 block can sell for thousands of dollars. Complete, running 340s command premium prices that would have seemed insane in 1970. The aftermarket hasn't forgotten the 340 either. Companies like Edelbrock, Holley, and Comp Cams still produce performance parts specifically for the 340. Modern technology has pushed these engines even further. With aluminum heads, roller cams, and electronic fuel injection, builders are getting 500-plus horsepower from naturally aspirated 340s while maintaining street manners. There's something deeply satisfying about the 340 story. In an era when everyone was obsessed with size, Chrysler proved that brains could beat brawn. They showed that efficiency, not displacement, was the key to performance. The 340 was engineering elegance in cast iron and aluminum, a perfect example of doing more with less. The technical legacy of the 340 extends far beyond Mopar. The lessons learned, the importance of head flow, compression, and valve timing, influenced engine design for decades. Modern engines like Ford's Coyote 5.0 and Chevy's LS series owe a debt to the 340's philosophy of efficiency over displacement. But perhaps the 340's greatest achievement was democratizing performance. Before the 340, if you wanted to run 13-second quarter miles, you needed big block money and big block insurance premiums. The 340 made genuine high performance accessible to working-class enthusiasts. A kid with a part-time job could afford a used Duster 340 and have a car capable of embarrassing trust fund babies in their big block toys. The street racing stories from the 340 era are legendary. There's the tale of a stock-appearing dart swinger 340 that cleaned up at Detroit's Woodward Avenue for an entire summer, taking money from unsuspecting big block owners night after night. The owner had done nothing but a good tune-up and removed the air cleaner lid. That's all it took. Or consider the documented case of a 1970 Duster 340 that ran 1377 at 104 mph at the 1970 NHRA Winter Nationals, completely stock. The time slip is in the NHRA archives. That's supercar performance by 1970 standards from a car that cost $2,547 base price. Adjusted for inflation, that's about $18,000 today. Try finding that kind of performance per dollar now. The 340 also proved invaluable in endurance racing. The 1970 Trans Am season saw Dan Gurney's AIR Cuda's battling Factory, Camaros, Mustangs, and Javelins. The 340-powered cars won 3 races outright and consistently finished on the podium. These weren't drag races where the 340's launch advantage could dominate. These were road races requiring sustained high RPM operation for hours. The 340 never missed a beat. Even law enforcement recognized the 340's capability. Several police departments ordered A-body pursuit cars with 340 engines. The California Highway Patrol tested a 1971 Dodge Dart 340 and found it could outrun their 440-powered Plymouth pursuit vehicles in certain conditions. The lighter weight and better handling made the 340 cars more effective in urban pursuit situations. The human side of the 340 story is equally compelling. Tom Hoover, known as the father of the 426 Hemi, was instrumental in the 340's development. He understood that not everyone could afford or insure a Hemi, but they still deserved genuine performance. The 340 was his gift to the working man. Willem Weertman, Chrysler's chief engine engineer, pushed for the high-flow heads despite cost concerns. He argued that without proper breathing, the 340 would just be another also-ran small block. His insistence on the X-heads, despite their higher production cost, made the 340 what it was. Then there were the assembly line workers at Chrysler's Mound Road engine plant who built these engines. They took pride in the 340, knowing they were building something special. Former workers recall that 340 blocks got extra attention, with builders ensuring every tolerance was perfect. This wasn't just another engine, it was Chrysler's pride. The 340's influence on car culture can't be overstated. It changed how people thought about performance. Before the 340, muscle car culture was all about biggest engine wins. The 340 proved that smart engineering could triumph over brute force. It was the thinking man's muscle car engine. Today, when electric vehicles are producing instant torque and 1,000-horsepower supercars are almost commonplace, it's easy to forget how revolutionary the 340 was. In 1968, making 320-plus real horsepower from 340 cubic inches with a warranty was remarkable. Doing it while maintaining street manners and achieving decent fuel economy was almost unprecedented. The 340 also represented something uniquely American. It was optimized for the kind of performance Americans cared about: traffic light to traffic light, 0 to 60 quarter-mile times. It wasn't designed for the Autobahn or Le Mans. It was built for Woodward Avenue, for Main Street, USA, for every stoplight Grand Prix in every town across the country. When emissions regulations finally killed the 340, it marked the end of an era. The engines that followed, the 360, the 318 four-barrel, were good engines, but they lacked the 340's magic combination of specifications. They couldn't replicate that perfect storm of compression, cam timing, and head flow that made the 340 special. But the 340's DNA lives on. When Chrysler developed the modern 392 Hemi, they applied lessons learned from the 340 about valve sizing and port flow. The Hellcat engine's obsession with airflow can trace its roots back to the 340's X-heads. Even the modern 5.7 Hemi's bore and stroke ratio echoes the 340's over-square design philosophy. For enthusiasts who lived through the 340 era, the engine represents more than just hardware. It's a reminder of when performance was raw and mechanical, when you could hear and feel every component working. No computers, no variable valve timing, no direct injection, just air, fuel, compression, and spark combined with elegant simplicity. The collector market has validated the 340's significance. Today, a numbers-matching 1970 Plymouth Duster 340 can sell for $50,000 or more. A documented low-mileage example might fetch $75,000. These aren't Hemi Cuda prices, but for what was essentially Chrysler's budget performance car, these values speak volumes about the 340's lasting appeal. Restoration specialists report that 340 cars are among the most frequently cloned vehicles. Countless 318-powered Dusters and Darts have been converted to 340 tribute cars. The demand for 340 engines and parts has spawned a cottage industry of reproduction components. You can now buy brand new X-heads cast from original Chrysler patterns for your restoration. The racing world hasn't forgotten the 340 either. NHRA stock and super stock classes still see 340-powered cars competing successfully. With modern technology and 5 decades of development knowledge, these engines are faster than ever. A well-built stock Class 340 car can now run in the 12-second range while still meeting NHRA's strict originality requirements. Perhaps the most telling tribute to the 340 comes from its competitors. GM and Ford engineers have acknowledged in interviews that the 340 forced them to rethink their small block development. The 340's success directly influenced the development of Chevy's LT1 350 and Ford's 351 Cleveland. When your competition copies your homework, you know you got it right. The 340 story is ultimately about proving conventional wisdom wrong. It showed that displacement wasn't everything, that efficiency could beat size, that smart engineering could overcome brute force, that a small block could run with the big boys and beat them at their own game. It democratized performance and changed car culture forever. Every time a modern tuner extracts huge power from a small displacement engine, they're following the path the 340 blazed. Every time an engineer prioritizes airflow over displacement, they're applying lessons the 340 taught. Every time someone proves that bigger isn't always better, they're echoing what the 340 demonstrated 50 years ago. The Mopar 340 V8 wasn't just an engine, it was a statement. A declaration that performance came from engineering excellence, not just cubic inches. It was proof that David could indeed slay Goliath if David was smart enough. And for 5 glorious years, from 1968 to 1973, this giant killer ruled the streets, 1 13-second quarter mile at a time. So the next time someone tells you there's no replacement for displacement, remind them of the 340. Remind them of all those big blocks left, wondering what happened at the finish line. Remind them that 275 advertised horsepower was the biggest lie Chrysler ever told, and enthusiasts loved them for it. The 340 may be gone, but its legend lives on in every small block that punches above its weight, in every underdog that beats the favorite, in every engineer who chooses brains over brawn. What's your favorite giant killer engine story? Have you ever witnessed a small block embarrass a big block? Drop a comment below and share your tales of displacement being defeated by engineering. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's greatest performance engines, make sure to subscribe. We're just getting started exploring the legendary power plants that changed automotive history. Until next time, keep those engines screaming, and remember, it's not the size that counts, it's how efficiently you use it.